Hello, I'm Cuora. We live in a three-dimensional world. That's our reality. And generally, we're drawn to what feels familiar and believable. So when an artwork fails to convey this feeling of 3D space, it looks awkward, unnatural. But when an artwork is great at conveying this illusion of 3D, we love it. Have a look at this artwork made by Rolla. I think this is a great display of the use of various techniques to further enhance this feeling of 3D space. Everything really is just really well executed. But here's the thing, a sheet of paper, flat. Your digital screen, flat. Both are a flat two-dimensional surface. So how? That's what I'll try and teach you in this crash course. With the right skills and methods, we can trick the eyes, creating the illusion of depth, the illusion of something that appears to be three-dimensional, believable, tangible, edible, almost as if we could actually interact with it, because 3D forms, depth, and perspective are the foundation of how we see the world. Objects, people, landscapes, anything. It's really no surprise why they're considered one of the most fundamental skills in art. I'll teach you how to draw something as simple as a box of perspective, and eventually move all the way up to stuff like the mathematics of foreshortening. Don't be scared, you don't need to be a mathematician, or at least I'll try to explain it to the best of my abilities. A few of you might be saying, Papa, I want to draw anime girl with big boob. Well, too bad. If you can't even draw a box, how do you expect to draw a whole human body? Let's start with the very basics. In order to draw a three-dimensional form like a box, pyramid, or sphere, you need to know how to draw two-dimensional shapes. 2D shapes are the foundation to draw three-dimensional ones. A box is basically just multiple squares. Yeah, I don't think I need to explain more. It goes in the square hole. We can mostly ignore 2D shapes. There are, however, two shapes that I would be very happy and pleased if you did practice. Circles and ellipses. A pretty common trend that I've taken note of, especially among less experienced artists, is that they often struggle more with drawing convincing cylinders compared to boxes due to the round shape. You can easily check if the edges of your boxes follows perspective. However, round shapes are round, which is what makes them a bit tricky. You might come across round and circular shapes during sketching or drawing round objects, a lot more than you might anticipate. And human eyes will be able to tell when a circle or ellipse is poorly drawn, and pretty easily as well. So, our first exercise in this crash course, I would recommend drawing circles and ellipses. This is also a very common warm-up exercise for several reasons. You could draw a bunch of random circles at different sizes, or draw them progressively becoming flatter. Try and make sure they're as round and smooth as possible. You might often come across circles in perspective, which is ellipses. One thing I see artists do is just using a box as a perspective guide for the ellipses, which works pretty well, especially if you want them to be accurate and believable. But I would still advocate to also practice them a bit, cause it can be a bit time consuming just for a circle in perspective. A majority of these exercises will mostly be ones that I personally recommend, so there's always more exercises out there. Finally, let's talk about perspective. So, what exactly is perspective? Let's take a look at these two boxes here. Box number 1 has perfectly parallel edges, while box number 2 doesn't have any parallel edges at all. But how come box number 2 feels weirdly more natural? That's because it technically is more natural to our eyes. Perspective, simply put, is how we perceive the apparent size of an object depending on the distance from us. If the object is far away from us, it looks smaller. If the object is close to us, it looks bigger. You see this box here? The back side of it is further away from us, which is why it shrinks and converges, looking smaller than the front. Artists also refer to this shrinking effect as diminution. Artists then use perspective to create this illusion of depth, because perspective is just how we perceive the world. Every object, building, person, everything. So how exactly do we draw it? If we draw lines along the edges of this box, they will converge. We usually refer to these as orthogonal lines, perspective guidelines, or vanishing lines. Different names, same idea. The orthogonal lines converge together until they meet at a point. That's what we call a vanishing point. A vanishing point represents the directions of an object. Lines parallel facing that direction will converge towards it. Now, the reason why we love boxes for perspective is because they can show three major directions very clearly all at once with their edges, the height, width, and depth, while still being relatively easy to draw. When marking out your vanishing point, the vanishing point is usually located on the horizon line. Depends on the object's rotation and alignment. Objects might be rotated randomly and doesn't exactly hit the horizon line. The horizon line kinda explains itself. It's where the earth meets the sky, and it's also the eye level of the view. By making the horizon line higher, it's as if the camera is tilted downwards, and by making the horizon line lower, it's like a camera tilted upwards. Artists usually draw 1-point, 2-point, and 3-point perspective. I want you to keep in mind, all three of these are specific scenarios. 1-point perspective is when we're directly looking at its surface. 2-point perspective is when we're looking at its edge. And 3-point perspective is when we're looking at its corner, from below or above. 1-point perspective, this one is pretty simple. You just add a vanishing point, maybe at the horizon line, maybe draw some surfaces that are perfectly square. And then all of the edges will then converge to the vanishing point. You might see this often with street views or hallways. If you can draw 1-point perspective, congratulations! You can now draw something that most couldn't until the 15th century. I might be wrong, if any historians want to correct me, that'll be great. 2-point perspective. Now there's a second one, usually located on the horizon line as well. Think of it this way, vanishing point 1 is an x-axis, vanishing point 2 is a y-axis. Any edges along the x-axis converge towards vanishing point x, and any edges along the y-axis converge towards vanishing point y. You'll likely see this often when looking at the corner of an object or building. Now, when we add a third vanishing point, it's like adding a z-axis. The third vanishing point is typically below or above the horizon line, depending if you're looking up or down. When we start adding more vanishing points, like 4-point or 5-point perspective, you can see that everything starts to bend. You basically add 4 points or maybe a 5th point in the middle, and now your edges curve. This is usually referred to as curvilinear or fisheye perspective. Going beyond 3-point perspective can lead to some really cool and dynamic artworks. But if you just need it to be believable, learning 1, 2, and 3-point perspective is more than enough. Of course, keep in mind you might encounter multiple sets of vanishing points. If multiple objects or lines share the same orientation, like these buildings here, their parallel lines meet at the same vanishing point. But if they don't share the same orientation, like these boxes, then they'll all have different directions, each with their own set of additional vanishing points. Additional vanishing points, aside from the main one, are usually referred to as auxiliary vanishing points. Let's say you want to draw a door opening. Well, that door has changed its orientation and directions, which means the door's vanishing points will be different. Some artists will then make these auxiliary vanishing points specifically for the door itself. Again, remember, these points of perspective are certain kinds of scenarios, so of course, there can be multiple types of perspective in a single image. Now, is one perspective better than the other? Not really, it just depends on what you want to draw, like a street view, a view looking downwards, or a curvilinear shot. Is it wrong to not use perspective? Not exactly. This is called an isometric view. Unlike perspective, there's no lines converging at all, and every single line is perfectly parallel to each other. You might see this with certain top view games or technical drawings. Even Lego instructions often use isometric views. There's also orthographic views, like blueprint drawings, front, side, and top views, all perfectly flat. This way, it's a lot easier to measure, without perspective screwing over your measurements. But if you want to make art that feels believable, as if you're looking through a window or photo, then yeah, perspective is quite essential. I'll introduce 3 more things before we move on to some exercises: overlap, foreshortening, and atmospheric perspective. Overlap is pretty basic. If an object is covered by another, our brain thinks that the object at the front is closer. It's a quote-unquote easy way to add some depth into your art. The reason I say that is because there is a pitfall. Let's say you draw a character crossing their legs while walking. Why does it look off? It's likely because this specific pose itself shouldn't be possible in a 3D space. It's as if the legs are clipping or facing through each other, making it less believable. So be a bit careful when overlapping objects. You should still consider how these objects exist in a three-dimensional space, the spatial relationship between the objects. Foreshortening can be tricky. Foreshortening happens when an object is rotated or positioned in a way as if it's overlapping itself, making it look compressed. You see this cube here? When it's at a 0-degree angle, the blue side is fully visible, but as the cube rotates, you'll see that the blue side becomes more compressed. It becomes shorter. There's many ways to draw foreshortening, all of which I will cover later. And again, there is a pitfall for foreshortening, which is why some artists find a foreshortening annoying. We know that the actual size and proportions doesn't exactly match what we directly see. Because of that, we instinctively try to correct it, which often leads to us drawing it too long. Sometimes you just gotta trust what you see. Atmospheric perspective, also known as aerial perspective, is an effect created by the atmosphere itself. Have a look at this photo of a mountain landscape. You can see how the mountains further away starts losing contrast and clarity, and it also starts blending in with the atmosphere, maybe blue if the sky is blue, or red if it's a sunset. You can apply this to your art to create a sense of depth and distance. You can see it in the background in Rola's art here, how the skulls are slowly fading away, blending into the background. Or those panels of God by Murata, how God slowly fades into the blue. Repeat after me. No pain, no gain. Every day is like day. Train insane or remain the same. Let's talk about exercises which can help you get better at drawing 3D forms. You might have heard the phrase, think in 3D. It's not just about imagining a cube in your head, but also how the cube occupies space, how the cube interacts with other objects, how it rotates, where the front and back surfaces are located. Now you're not only drawing in 3D, but also fully understanding three-dimensional space. These exercises I'm mentioning are just ones that I recommend. The main goal of these exercises is basically to turn your mind into a 3D engine. Our second exercise of this course, and also the first 3D exercise, is the classic cube rotation. You might have seen this one before. The goal is to draw a cube and rotate it. It'll help you better visualize an accurate cube and get more familiar with drawing it from different angles. Sounds simple, right? Well, yeah, but also not really. I've seen some artists skip this exercise because, rotate a box? Anyone can do that. I'm gonna do this exercise instead, that looks way harder. Let me break down why this is such a highly recommended exercise. Sure, many people can draw a cube in what looks like perspective. However, just like real-life exercise, there's variations. A sloppy cube rotation like this is basically the art equivalent of a knee push-up. So how do you practice this cube rotation exercise, like a one-arm push-up instead? Here are some things to keep in mind. Make sure the perspective is correct. If you can see it's wrong, correct it. Maybe try and extend the edges to see how accurate your perspective was. Try also and pay attention to the foreshortening. When the cube rotates, the faces will foreshorten at certain angles. Some sides will look compressed due to the angle we see it from. Like I said before, we have a habit of accidentally drawing the foreshortening a bit too long. So if you don't pay attention, well, then it might look deformed and doesn't look like a cube at all. A cube is supposed to have 6 equal-sized faces. You can even push this exercise a step further. You could draw the sides of a cube which are invisible, like some sort of X-ray vision. You could also take it a step further and put something inside the cube, maybe a mug or a head. Is it wrong to draw sloppy boxes like this? Well, yeah, kinda, but it's fine if you're a beginner. But the more skilled you are, the less you'll benefit from doing sloppy boxes. You know, when you're more fit, it's more efficient to do one-arm push-ups rather than knee push-ups. This is why I see the box rotation exercise as the push-ups of the art world. It's easy to pick up, and you can gradually make it a bit more difficult. It's great at training at guesstimating the vanishing points, a bit of consistent foreshortening practice, getting better at drawing straight lines, and getting better at visualizing something from another angle. The next exercise I recommend might be a bit difficult. I would mostly recommend doing this after you're comfortable with the box rotation one. I want you to draw 2 randomly rotated cubes that are fused together. Not like that, silly. Like this. Let's break down this exercise. I've talked about thinking in 3D and the spatial relationship thingy, and also the whole clipping problem, where you might treat 3D forms as stickers and not as actual 3-dimensional objects. This exercise will help you train your spatial awareness and your sense of 3D space. Our third exercise of this course is intersecting cubes. Not only do we have to consider the perspective for both cubes separately, but by suddenly forcing the cubes to actually touch and interact, it'll eventually improve your ability to intuitively understand spatial relationships. Which part of this cube abomination is visible, which is not. It really forces your brain to think of these as solid objects that has volume and exist in a 3D space, rather than just floating around like the box rotation. It's an exercise that can be a bit mind-boggling at first, but you'll eventually become better at it. The reason why we want to improve this ability of being able to think in 3D space is because it'll help make your art a lot more believable. Let's say you draw two characters interacting without making it feel flat. This intersecting exercise you can do with any form really. Maybe cylinders intersecting with cubes, or humans clipping through each other. If you're up for a challenge, maybe try out the 250 box challenge. It's basically a free course to help you get better at drawing boxes and perspective. It's more than simply doodling some boxes. There's a website here explaining how you should be drawing the boxes in order to actually improve. I will come forward and say I haven't done it. I couldn't bother drawing 250 boxes. You might have noticed that we've mostly been talking about boxes and maybe cylinders. But wait, humans aren't boxes. Many things aren't boxes. So how do we draw other stuff? That right there is our main protagonist. It's Sphere-chan. And over there is Box-senpai. Box-senpai is gorgeous, but she seems to be interested in other forms. Sphere-chan wants to intersect with Box-senpai, but she knows that Box-senpai is out of her league. Despite Sphere-chan technically being a primal geometrical shape, she's kinda similar to an organic form. Many geometrical forms are able to show perspective. You know, boxes are able to show 3 directions, which is why people love boxes. Meanwhile, something like spheres and organic forms doesn't automatically look 3-dimensional by itself, like boxes. So how exactly do we make organic forms feel more 3-dimensional? Take a look at this sphere. It looks 2-dimensional currently, like a circle. However, if we add some shading, it'll look more 3-dimensional now. But let's save lights and shadows for another video. There is, however, other ways to make it look more 3-dimensional. For example, the patterns of a basketball. The patterns help by highlighting the 3-dimensional form, and there's even a sense of direction. We could also add contour lines. So let's talk more about contour lines and why we like them. Take a look at these organic shapes here. They don't look that 3-dimensional yet, right? But look what happens when we draw these contour lines. Contour lines are like a cut or a line drawn around the form. What these contour lines do is that they highlight the 3D form of the object, which is really useful for less sharp organic forms. Contour lines are a lot more common than you think. For example, when an artist draws a character wearing a ring on their finger, the ring itself is actually highlighting the 3D form of the finger, like a contour line. It could also be a sleeve or a belt. And contour lines are great at indicating direction. You see the sphere here? By moving the contour lines around, it looks like the sphere itself is rotating. This is also why people like contour lines when drawing foreshortening, as they can help indicate the direction. An organic exercise I recommend is drawing cross contour lines. Maybe find an image of a fruit or vegetable, or maybe one in your fridge. Draw the outline of the silhouette, and then you draw the contour lines in order to show its 3-dimensional form. I like this exercise for organic forms. It doesn't even have to be a fruit. You could even draw a hand and give it contour lines. The reason why I recommend doing this exercise is because it's pretty often that I see artists drawing some clothing and the shirt sleeve is drawn in a way that just makes it look very flat. Doing this exercise will make you more familiar with organic shapes. If you want to expand this exercise further, you could do a full cut through the form and dissect it, almost like slicing a fruit apart. Alright everyone, welcome back to the season finale. Oh look, it's everyone that has a crush on Box-senpai. It seems like they're all lining up, ready to confess. But wait, who's that over there approaching Box-senpai from behind? It's... Lord have mercy, Sphere-chan. Is this really the same 2-dimensional Sphere-chan from before? Box-senpai is on her knees. Sphere-chan wins the romance. The show's over. Everything we've covered so far is enough knowledge to make your art feel 3D and believable. Further ahead, I do have an extra section, a bit more slightly advanced stuff. But for now, let's actually try and apply the knowledge that we have. A majority of us don't just draw all the details in one go. That's pretty hard to do. So instead, we slowly sketch and construct, step by step, gradually adding more detail. You might have heard of the infamous box method or the Loomis method. We do these sketching methods to make drawing a lot more manageable for us. And hey, do you recognize something? It's the boxes and cylinders we've been practicing. Let's go through the steps of construction. Look at all those details. It can be way too overwhelming to draw the entire object at once. So instead, we simplify it down to its overall primal form. A large building could be simplified to a big box. An arm could just be multiple forms. We know these shapes, we've been practicing them. By simplifying objects to a simple form, it makes them significantly more manageable. Now that we've simplified an object into simple shapes, we become sculptors. Some of you might have heard the phrase, draw like a sculptor. Like clay sculptures, we mold it, we twist it, and we reshape it. Or maybe like stone sculptures, we carve into it. Maybe we round off the edges, carve a hole through it, or carve smaller holes. Basically, we start off by turning it into a simple form and sculpt it, gradually adding more detail until we have what we're trying to draw. Some artists will refer to this as manipulation, as in we're manipulating the form. I personally just prefer calling it sculpting. And that's about it. Of course, some things will be way more complex and harder to draw. Human anatomy requires a lot of studying to depict it accurately. So basically, step 1, observation/study. We analyze and study if needed to understand the form. Step 2, we simplify and construct with simple shapes. Step 3, we sculpt it, adding detail until it looks like the thing we're trying to draw. For some smaller exercises, I guess I would recommend practicing sculpting, different kinds of molding and shaping, and different kinds of carving and stuff. It could be a nice little warm-up. For an actual exercise, I recommend to find an object, maybe something on your desk, in your room, or a random image of something online. Then you draw it by following the steps I mentioned. I find this to be a nice exercise. You're essentially training your brain to see the overall structure, instead of getting overwhelmed by details. Should your workflow always be this strict? No, of course not. Maybe at some point when you're skilled enough, you won't have the need to draw any primitive forms beforehand. However, it's pretty hard, which is why I would still recommend doing construction to actually get familiar with observing and understanding 3D forms. Also, keep in mind, there's multiple ways to construct something. For example, the many ways to construct a human head. I'm just warning you, we are slowly getting into some really specific and technical stuff. I will not be covering every single technical drawing technique that exists. Technical perspective drawing could honestly have a whole course for itself. So I will only teach you certain techniques which I think are relevant enough if you want to make art like this. You really don't need the ability to draw like architects in order to draw this. First is just some extra techniques to accurately draw stuff in perspective, which could come in handy. The reason why many of us love boxes for construction is because they're a quick way to map out the overall volume. They're great at showing perspective, and they're really easy to measure. We can easily find the middle of a square-like surface. If we draw 2 diagonal lines from one corner to the other, where they cross here is the middle of the surface, and this also works in perspective. Because it's the middle, this will also allow us to perfectly split it into 2 equal sections. We can even split it into 3 equal sections by connecting the middle here with the corners and then split it where they intersect. And now we have 3 sections. You can split it into 4 sections just by doing the cross thing here twice. You could continue up to 5, but I would just use other methods like this one. You draw an additional line and add your desired amount of sections and dots. Make sure the dots have equal distance between them. Draw from the dot through this corner until it hits the horizon line. And where it hits the horizon line will be a supporting point for the sections. Just connect the rest to this point, and where the lines are hitting the edge will be where you split it. And there you have it, 8 equal planes in perspective. Using this method, you can also split it into some certain patterns. There's also another version without the additional point. This version, however, isn't as viable. It does require the line here you draw the dots to not be affected by perspective. Let's say you want to make this plane twice as long in perspective. You can do that. You just find the middle, draw from the corner and through this middle part of the edge, and where it intersects the orthogonal line, that's your second plane, and you can keep on extending it. If you can split your planes accurately like this, then you can also draw accurate ellipses. We can do the good old classic, draw a square and then draw an ellipse inside the square. Or a square divided like a pizza, and kinda use that to draw an ellipse. And honestly, I would say that's enough, but there are ways to become more accurate. If you want to draw a cylinder using a cube, there's methods where you can use a 4x4 grid, then draw these lines here that will give you more points to draw with, and you'll have a bit more accurate ellipse rather than the two other methods. We can actually check if an ellipse is accurate. Ellipses have what we call a major axis and a minor axis. These axes go through the widest point of the ellipse, and they are perpendicular. If the minor axis crosses through the middle of the surface and is facing the other vanishing point. And hey, look at that. Here's another quick tip. The back side of the cylinder is actually more circular than the front. I only went through accurate ellipses and cylinders very briefly. Again, I want to state this is really unnecessary. Like if you want to draw an accurate ellipse, just use digital tools if you have them. I guess this could be used as an exercise to draw more accurate ellipses freehanded. No one does this during their art. If you do want to learn more about drawing ellipses by hand, I am not stopping you. You might have noticed that if you place your vanishing points closer together, the perspective is a lot more distorted, and this distortion decreases as the vanishing points are further away. So how do I know if the location of my vanishing points are actually accurate? What we have here is what some would call a picture plane. It's our canvas, our frame. It's what we're able to see. We might be viewing it from a person's eye or a camera. That camera or person is our POV, also called a station point. Then of course we also have the horizon line / eye level. In the middle we have the center line, which is the center. And in the middle of our frame is our center of vision point. From our camera, our station point, what we are able to see is within a cone. That's our cone of vision. The middle of a cone of vision is of course the center of vision point, the middle of the frame itself. Within our cone of vision is our comfortable field of view with the minimal amount of distortion. When we start drawing outside of cone of vision, you'll see the perspective becoming more distorted. Your two vanishing points on the horizon line is actually perpendicular to the station point, no matter how it's rotated. Keep this in mind for later. How big should your cone be? The cone has an angle. The most common angle is about a 60-degree cone, which closely matches the human eye. But what would happen if we did change the cone of vision? By narrowing the cone of vision, let's say 30 degrees, and yeah, you can see less. You made your vision smaller. It's like zooming in with a camera. So in order to see the entire picture plane again, we have to move our station point backwards. But now something's different. Because you had to move your POV, your station point further back, your vanishing points on the horizon line has come further apart, which is why it makes it look a bit more flat. We can also do the opposite and make the field of view bigger. Well, now you can see too much, so let's move forward. And because of that, your vanishing points are pulled closer together here, which is what makes it look more distorted. To put it in simpler terms, it's kinda like changing your FOV in a video game, or switching to a different camera lens if you're familiar with photography. Back to the vanishing points. We know that the two vanishing points is perpendicular around the station point, and this way we can draw the second vanishing point more accurately. And yes, there is a way to accurately find the third vanishing point. But again, doing all of this for some art is way beyond overkill. I mainly wanted to teach you about the cone of vision and what happens if you draw outside of it, how lenses and the camera's distance can affect the vanishing point, and I guess an introduction or insight of how to draw a more advanced perspective. And no, you don't always have to stick with the 60-degree cone. Different types of lenses can lead to different types of effects, which is why directors and photographers uses multiple kinds of lenses. Wide-angle lenses can be dynamic, they can capture a large scene, and a telephoto lens is great if you want to focus on something. Of course, there's more reasons, but I'll rather save that for a composition video. You might notice that with a telephoto lens, the background feels a lot more compressed compared to a wide-angle lens. I want you to keep this in mind for later. There's something I haven't explained yet. Why is it that the background is different with a wide-angle lens and a telephoto lens? Why is it when artists draw foreshortening that when the object is rotated towards us, it looks really big up close, while in another artwork or photo, the foreshortening doesn't look like it's becoming bigger at all? Let's talk about diminution again. You know diminution, the effect that makes objects look smaller when further away. Some of you might think it scales at a linear constant rate. Let's try and test it. If we draw a small row of equal sized squares here, and then put them into perspective, you might already notice that they don't scale at a constant rate. The size difference between the two closest to us is way bigger than the size difference between the last two. If we try and measure it and put it on a graph, x representing the scores closest to furthest from us, and y being the apparent scale we see, we'll see that it's actually proportional. This is why a telephoto lens, which is further away from the object, the size difference of the background and foreground is smaller compared to the size difference of a wide-angle lens. Because a wide-angle lens is closer, it makes the size difference of the background and foreground look a lot bigger. This is also the reason why when you see artworks of photos including something like a foreshortened limb near the camera, it looks really big compared to the body, while in another photo of a foreshortened limb barely looks like it changed size. The first one is at a close distance where the diminution size change is exaggerated, while the other one is at a long distance where the size change is minimal. Speaking of foreshortening, here's some methods that I see people using when drawing foreshortening. The first method is using something like a big box. Using a box is a nice way to map out the overall perspective and subject, like how much you want to exaggerate the foreshortening and the subject you're drawing being inside the box. A second method that I've seen is just doing some construction with simple forms and relying on these simple forms to guide the perspective. A bit less common method I see that people use to draw foreshortening with in the sketching phase is just eyeballing it and using contour lines to find the overall 3D form and also the direction. There's also this one called the coil method. It shows the direction as well, but it's a coil. One last small tip before we end off the video, and that is rotating something in perspective. There's many technical ways which I will not cover. Listen, I was debating if I wanted to include technical stuff at all in this course, but I will share this one. You can rotate a cube by using a top and front view, and use the edges to locate where it's rotated. The reason why is because it's not too complex and works for a lot of things. Let's say you're struggling with the 3D form of an anime head. You can use this method to rotate it, like this. So, how accurate do you actually have to be? Have a look at these pieces here. The perspective is not 100% accurate at all, but it still looks nice. Most recommendations usually fluctuate between 70 to 90% accuracy. Like, you really don't need architect levels of accuracy. It's why artists are recommending these exercises, so you can somewhat eyeball it. At most, they might be using a perspective grid to guide them. It doesn't have to be accurate, it just needs to be believable. Unless you're doing like photorealistic art or something, I don't know. Now that you have a lot more knowledge, you might be able to see how it all applies to this artwork from earlier. The overall perspective, the atmospheric perspective, the contour lines showing the 3D form and direction of the body, the foreshortening, even the line art becoming bigger as it approaches the camera. However, just because you know a bit more about 3D forms now, don't think you're a master just yet. Sure, knowledge in theory is great, but being able to retain and execute that knowledge well requires a bit more work than simply just knowing it. Have a look at my boxes from a year ago and my boxes today. And that's it for this video. I hope you learned something new. I know it's supposed to be a crash course, but it did feel like there's a few things I could explain better somehow. But anyway, I'm done. I've spent way too long trying to make this video. Good night, everyone.